Welcome to Tokyo Game Life, a Tokyo-based video game podcast focusing on Nintendo and gaming culture in Japan's capital. Your host Mono here to bring you a slice of gaming life from Tokyo. We're leading off with the game section today as returning guest Joshua Goldie, aka the Nintendo Chronicler, joins to chat about Marvelous, Another Treasure Island, a Japan-only Super Famicom title that was Eiji Aonuma's directorial debut. We dive into the game's fascinating origins as a CD title, its unique gameplay, the influence on Zelda, and everything else. For the feature, I take you to Yokohama to visit the activity-filled Dragon Quest Carnival. Warning for the squeamish, there will be giant slimes. Let's start with the game section and Marvelous, Another Treasure Island with Joshua Goldie. Today we're leading off with the game section to chat about 1996's Marvelous, Another Treasure Island, a Japan-only game with a fascinating legacy that recently hit Nintendo Switch Online. Joining me to chat all about the game is a special guest. So guest, please introduce yourself.
I'm back. It's me, the Nintendo Chronicler, Joshua Goldie, I was on the Another Code episode of Tokyo Game Life. However many months ago that was now.
Welcome back.
It's good to be back. And we're here talking about a game that the first game that's on my channel. So this is a special one for me.
Yeah, you last showed up on the podcast to chat about Another Code Recollection, which is a fairly obscure game in the Nintendo Pantheon. But now we are getting even more obscure.
Yeah.
And maybe next time we can just go down the iceberg of obscure Nintendo games. But
we'll start talking about a game that no one has heard of.
A lot of people probably haven't heard of, but it is quite an important game, I would say, and at least an interesting one. So Joshua, let's start at the beginning. What is Marvelous, Another Treasure Island?
So Marvelous is a game that was made by a very young team at Nintendo back in the 90s, I should say. They're not young now. You could kind of compare it almost to Splatoon, but back then for the Super Nintendo. And it was an adventure game, very similar in looks to A Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, but styled more a point-and-click adventure game. There was significantly less focus on combat, although there was a bit of it, and instead on searching the environment, finding items, solving puzzles, and making use of your three protagonists. Because that's kind of the main hook. It's Legend of Zelda, but there are three of them, Dion, Max, and Jack, who are these three boys who are out on a summer camp when pirates invade the island they're on their camping trip for, and they have to set off on this pirate ship and go find all these keys to get the legendary pirate treasure. And each of the boys have their own inventory with unique items, and they've all got their own special abilities they can do. Dion is a small little guy who can run really fast and crawl into tight spaces. Max is the middle one of the group. He's a wide, big guy. He's the strongest. He can attack. I mean, Dion can attack as well by throwing baseballs, but Max can actually punch people and kick footballs at them. And he's just good for all the power puzzles. And then Jack is this tall guy who can jump really far, reach high places. And he's also the nerd of the group. So, they give him all of the techie stuff. He can fix things and use devices that the other two don't understand. And you've got to go through these almost like episodes of a TV show. You go to different islands, and each island has its own separate little story with some overarching plot points. And it always results in usually a boss fight where you get a magical orb that you need, a crystal ball, and you need to get all, however many of them are, I can't remember off the top of my head now. But you take them all back and they act as the keys to the pirate treasure that's hidden on the initial first island. And so it's kind of episodic in that way. But it's fun. It's a really interesting little story. And it's got lots of different characters in it that are all quite fun to just find out what their whole deal is. And it messes with some sci-fi themes. There's one entire chapter that has time travel in it. And there's what's it called? Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
Yes.
That's a movie. Yeah, there's an entire chapter that's basically a parody of that, where you're in a jungle and these plant monsters are taking over. And in that same chapter, you have to get this gorilla out of the way by having him fall in love with the lady gorilla. There are lots of really light-hearted, silly moments jotted throughout the game. There's an entire penguin dating minigame that takes place in one of the chapters. It's very fun.
Do you happen to remember how you first came across the game?
So I was big into looking up random obscure games thanks to Super Smash Brothers. So Marvelous didn't actually make any appearance in Super Smash Brothers till Ultimate, and by that point I had played it. I probably imagine that I was looking up potential characters for Super Smash Bros. Brawl or something like that, because I know that's how I found characters like Suti Hakon, which is another really obscure Super Nintendo game. So I probably found the 3 main characters from that and then fell down the rabbit hole. And then when I actually looked at the visuals, and it's very much a Link to the Past coded in how it looks, I was like, "Ooh, this looks really cool. I want to play this at some point." And I know when I first played it, I actually own a cartridge for Marvelous. When I was in Japan for the first time back in 2014, obviously, you go retro game shopping, you go to Akihabara and you look around, and I found just the cartridge for Marvelous. I kind of wish I had a box copy now, but back then I was happy to have any copy of it.
Right.
So I picked up the game, and I picked up a few other Super Nintendo games, Genealogy of the Holy War, and I bought a Super Famicom to bring back and just started playing through all of these games. And obviously Marvelous is quite a text-heavy game, so I didn't fully know what I was doing back when I first played it. But I eventually found out that there was a fan translation that got made. So I decided to play that on an emulator to actually finish the game. And it was good. I enjoyed it. There's actually another fan translation, a more refined one, that I'm waiting on to do another replay of it.
Oh.
That's cool. I've been following the development of that, and they're doing it. So the original fan translation is kind of a very simple one, just replacing the text with English. This is more of a, what if Nintendo actually localized the game, did in all the extra effort. So there's graphical changes, there's a logo, there's lots of different edits to the script that would feel more natural for an official Nintendo release. It's a really cool project, but I have no idea when it's going to be finished.
Yeah, for me, I don't really remember how I learned about the game. It was probably just something I stumbled upon. Obviously, the main thing that caught my attention was that it was directed by none other than Eiji Aonuma. But he wasn't Eiji Aonuma at this time, right?
No, he wasn't. He was Eiji Onizuka. I should have written that down.
Yes, Eiji Onizuka.
There we go. I've got that from memory.
Yeah, this was something I had no idea that even happened until I started doing research for the episode. Yeah, he was Eiji Onizuka, and then changed his name to his wife's surname once he got married. I can't really find the main source for this, but multiple people on the internet have said so it must be true.
I mean, I can only assume that the source is that his wife presumably has Aonuma as her last name.
Yeah, maybe.
And people are like, oh, well, this is the same guy, and his name has changed between this point, so logically that must be the reason.
Yeah, I read that 5% of men in Japan changed their name to their wife's surname, which seems kind of high. I personally never met anyone who's done this. And the other only fictional example I can think of is Gendo Ikari from Evangelion. But either way, whatever his name was, he did direct Marvelous. And besides Aonuma, did any other notable devs work on this game?
Yeah, so Aonuma is definitely the most famous. And there are a few others that sort of went on and still work at Nintendo. So there was a sub-director for the game called Mitsuhiro Takano, who went on to direct 1080 Snowboarding and worked quite closely with a team behind Star Fox 64 and Tank Troopers, and he worked on Zelda, Ocarina of Time, the Twilight Princess. He worked on all 4 of those Zelda games with Aonuma. I think Tank Troopers is his latest game. I'm assuming he's still working at Nintendo, because that game came out in like 2017. So, no, 2016 even. But then there's Yoshinori Tsuchiyama, who was the graphic lead for this. He did all the character designs, and he went on to go work on a ton of Satellaview games, which was the same for Yuichi Ozaki, who did all the music. He also went on to work on a bunch of the Satellaview games. And now Tsuchiyama, I think the latest game he worked on was Princess Peach Showtime. He worked on that as a supervisor. And Ozaki has done sound stuff for like Metroid Dread and Samus Returns, Pilot Wings Resort. He's done a lot of technical sound. I don't think he comes up with the OST himself, but does more its implementation into the games. The techie parts of it. They're the main names behind the game, other than Miyamoto, who decided on who was going to help put the team together, and the producer of the game, whose name is leaving my mind right now, but he's the producer of tons of their older games. He's the guy who basically made the NES and Famicom.
Uemura?
I believe that's his name. Umera, yeah.
That's Yuki Uruma, the father of the Famicom. You can consider him. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of notable people who worked on this game. Kind of an all-star team, but maybe before they were all-stars, they worked on this game.
A pre-all-star team.
Yes. Especially this is the game Aonuma worked on before he became the lead producer of Zelda. So it is sort of I don't want to say proto-Zelda game, even though it's very obviously inspired by A Link to the Past, but there's definitely a lot of Zelda influence in this game. And I think another notable element of the game is that the development is quite interesting. It wasn't always intended to just be on an SNES cart. Can you delve into the original plan for the game?
Yeah, so part of the reason for doing this wasn't just to test out what the new team could do. Nintendo were planning on having the SNES CD, which is an entire other rabbit hole of information.
Yeah.
But obviously that never came out. But the idea was that this was going to be like the new IP that would launch with the Super Nintendo CD, similar to how F-Zero and Pilot Wings were the new IP that would show off what the Super Nintendo could do. So that was kind of the focus, and they went all out with it. It was going to have animated cutscenes with voice acting. They teamed up with Kyoto Animation, who worked on stuff like Koon and Clanad, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. This was before they had gotten it this big. So this is before they'd worked on any of those shows. But they did all of the animation that would be on this. And the story wasn't massively different. When they eventually jumped to the SNES, it was definitely more of a technical change. But obviously they couldn't use any of the cutscenes. And so they did rewrite the story so that the original version has Captain Maverick, who's the pirate king, the pirate whose treasure everyone is after. Yeah. In the original version, he was a guy who fought against pirates and stole their treasure rather than being a pirate himself. And the story was going to be about the boys who idolized him were following him on his adventure. So you'd go onto the different islands that he was on and find out what he has just done as they try and catch up to him. But then, obviously, in the final one, they decided to scrap that and have him be the deceased pirate that they're going. It was more Treasure Island inspired, I guess, the original. But yeah, it was going to be on that, and they were going to go all out with the presentation. But then the SNES CD just didn't happen. And so they had to shelve all of that. But one of the reasons the story actually changed was because they still wanted to use all the stuff from the SNES CD version, and were kind of hoping that maybe if they got to do a sequel or something, they could reuse all that animation. If they made a 64 version, if that could run the cutscenes, then they could reuse it all. So they just put that and made this a sort of based on but different story for the final product. That was the main thing that it being on the SNES CD kind of allowed them to do, just a way higher presentation than anything that the SNES had seen up to that point.
Yeah, it was definitely an ambitious game, and a lot of people might assume that it's a Zelda clone, but while it certainly borrows a lot of inspiration from Zelda, the gameplay structure is very different from that series. What gameplay aspect would you say is Marvelous's most unique element?
Either the character swapping mechanic, because obviously, as you would see it from just on the outside, it's a Zelda game, but you have 3 playable characters that you swap between, and you know who you're controlling because they have the leader's cap, which is usually on pieces of art, you'll see Dion wearing it, but in-game, all 3 of the boys will wear it. And that's idea where you can split them up, or they all follow on behind each other and the game will jump to their location. That's a big part of this game, using all 3 of them to get simultaneously and teaming them up together so you can kind of like Four Swords or Four Swords Adventures, where you could do have the 4 links and they get into a formation, and then only when they're in that formation can they pick up big blocks or push big boulders and stuff.
Right.
You could do that. If the 3 of them were together, then you'd button mash A on certain context-sensitive areas to lift up huge boulders or push minecarts and stuff like that. That's probably the most unique part of the game, but I'd say the thing it's really based around is the point-and-click aspect of it.
Yes.
Because you have the usual Zelda-looking gameplay where you run around and all that, but then if you press a button, it goes into like a mouse, I think, a finger or a hand, and then you click on stuff around the environment, and then they'll comment on it, or something will react to it, or you'll find an item from it. And if you talk to somebody, if it's a key character like Miss Gina, then the scene will change to a first-person view, where you can see the character in front of you and their profile, and then you can touch on stuff around the environment or poke them, and they'll get really annoyed at you if you do it. And I'd say from a gameplay perspective, that's kind of what makes Marvelous really unique, because it just takes elements from the adventure game genre that was usually found at PC at that point and puts it into the Super Nintendo. I actually kind of think if they had made this game for like DS or remade it for DS or something like that, it would be the perfect system for it, because you could have the touchscreen just be the point and click part of the game and you wouldn't have to swap between the two. Because I think that's the one issue I've got with Marvelous and its gameplay systems. It's kind of clunky. It's trying to do a lot of stuff. The inventory management is very clunky, as all three boys have their own inventories to sort through, and they can all equip one item at a time. So you're having to constantly bringing up the menu for each of the boys and changing which item they've got equipped. Whereas I think nowadays, if the game was to be remade, it would have a press R or L or ZR and ZL on the Switch Joy-Cons, and it will just cycle through whoever's the player's character at that moment. It cycle through their items. There's a lot of ways I think you could improve that game and make it less clunky, which they couldn't do back in the SNES days due to lack of buttons and, I guess, hardware power.
Right. Yeah, for me, it's definitely the blend between the kind of top-down Zelda exploration and the old-school menu-based investigation segments. That really stuck out to me. It's a bit strange because you don't really see that kind of, point and click aspect, especially in console games.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an interesting blend between, okay, Zelda is bringing forth a more modern kind of streamlined way you interact with items or the items in the world. And especially once you get to Ocarina of Time, it totally revolutionizes that. So it's a really interesting idea that it blends both of them, because you can essentially, zoom in on objects and you can be very precise about where you click on. For example, there's one mission where you have to kind of annoy a rat. So you can click on the rat's tail, you can click on its face, you can click on its nose. So being that precise is really unique for this type of Zelda-inspired game. But I think, there's a reason why we moved away from this type of input method, especially on console games. And you also mentioned the controlling the three characters. What do you think about this character swapping mechanic? Do you think it was implemented well? Or do you think it's one of the strongest elements? Or is it a bit clunky?
Yeah, I would say the actual character swapping part of it is implemented fine. You cycle through the three boys. They can be split up. They can be joined together. It's easy to control them all. I'd say the only times where it becomes clunky is the further you get into the game, when you start having a ton of items and you need to be constantly swapping. The one I mentioned before, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers sort of segment, that's one of those few segments where there is quite a bit of combat going on. So you have to swap to Dion and throw the baseballs at them to keep them from getting near you. And then you've got to swap to Max, or maybe it's Jack who has a lamp or something like that, I'm trying to remember, which you need to do to get through because it's dark and night. And then you've got to swap to Max to do some sort of block puzzle, something like that. There's a lot of swapping between to make use of each character's abilities. And Max also has Polly, this little fairy girl who you need for various little missions. And so you got to swap to him to use her, and then swap back to Jack in order to do this. And I think it's fine at the start of the game when there's very few things each character can do. But the further it goes on, the longer time it takes to actually do the action you want, because you're swapping character, opening up inventory, clicking on the right thing, making sure it's equipped, then doing this, and then swapping to the next character, and repeating over and over again. I'd say that's the one downside of having a three-character system. But from a technical standpoint, it's very impressive to do this. A Link to the Past originally dabbled with the idea of having three playable party members. I think it was the hero, the mage, and thief, or something like that. But they just couldn't get it to work and decided to focus on the hero being Link, obviously. But with this game being much later into the Super Nintendo's life cycle, they had the Super Accelerator 1 chip that they could take advantage of, which was the special chip that was used in Kirby Superstar and Mario RPG that gave the games more CPU power. And it's through that they were able to make this three-person Zelda game. Because you needed that in order to animate all three characters at once and keep track of their location in the world at all times, and be able to jump between them with very little lag and loading required. So it's definitely very technically impressive.
Yeah, on the Japanese box, it does say the SA1 chip on the cover. So they were really pushing that. And I really like the character swapping element. Definitely very technically impressive. And yeah, you might think it is cumbersome at first to control 3 characters. Because, yeah, I'm getting some Pikmin 3 flashbacks right now. But it was way smoother than I imagined. And yeah, it's one button to pick who you want to control. And honestly, I love that they switched the hats, that there's a leader hat.
Yes.
Because, yeah, on the cover art, Dion is wearing the hat. And so when I could switch the hat, it kind of blew my mind of, oh, wow, anyone can just wear the hat. And that's such a fun little addition. And you can also make them all come together and they follow you in a line, kind of like, I think of Dragon Quest, just the RPG party is roaming around. And one of the first puzzles in the game really highlights all the fun things you can do with the putting them together and splitting them up. Yeah, I already mentioned this, but the rat, he runs into a tent, and then you have to use one boy to block the hole that the rat came in, and use one boy to block the entrance to the tent so the rat can't get out. And then one boy goes in the tent to investigate. You don't really see that in Zelda, for example. So it stands out as a really unique element that you can take advantage of having 3 characters. And
it's
yeah,
puzzle games that require strategy and really thinking about what the puzzle is from an outside the box sort of perspective. Where do the pieces all go? You don't get that at all in Zelda because they just don't have that mechanic really, except for maybe Phantom Hourglass, because that had the Phantom you could control. No, Spirit Tracks, that's the one that you had the Phantom you could control. Even then, I can't think if they actually did any puzzles in that game.
Yeah, and like in Zelda, there are items in the game, and each boy has specific items, which you mentioned, which I guess eventually becomes cumbersome. But it is kind of an interesting idea that, okay, this boy can only use this one item. Max, he gets cleats so he can kick, and Dion gets the fishing rod, and Jack gets the baseball glove. Do you have a favorite character you like to control?
Of the 3 boys, I think Max is my favorite character. He's the most durable. He gets the boxing glove and the cleats for his ranged weapons. So he can start kicking stuff. I don't know. He's just a nice guy. And at the end, towards the end of the game, obviously I don't want to spoil things, but there's a decision you have to make with the boys. And I always find Max is the best option for that. And it sort of made me endear to him more in that moment. So yeah, I quite like Max.
I really like Max as well because, yeah, he's the tough guy. And he is kind of an unorthodox character that you'd play as in a video game. He looks kind of like Porky from Earthbound, but he's the good Porky.
He's a gentle giant type archetype.
Yeah. Dion, he kind of looks like what you would expect as a protagonist to look in this type of game. So yeah, I really like that. Oh, you can be Max and do all these fun things. Is there any other gameplay element that really sticks out in your mind besides the ones we talked about?
I think those are the main ones that really stick out to me. I do like a lot of the sort of scenarios and stuff rather than the gameplay elements in this. And I suppose there's that one, what are they called now? The shards you find, the yellow shards.
The luck rocks?
Yes, the luck rocks. Because they're scattered everywhere. They're basically the main collectible of the game. And it's very easy to miss some because of the way that the game is structured. You don't really go back to islands once you leave. So it's very easy to miss luck rocks. But they are a key reward that you can use. I think you can use them. You get ranked based on how many you get. And you can use them for hints. Because there's a hint system in the game, if I remember correctly. It's been a bit since I played it. But yeah, I remember the luck rock mechanic being an interesting addition.
Yeah, for me, not really a gameplay element, but I really like the pixel art graphics of the game. It looks very, very nice.
Beautiful game.
And all the characters look great, and especially when you zoom in on the investigation scenes, they are really nicely detailed pixel art, but still maintaining the art style. So yeah, it's a really nice looking game. And also, this is a weird one, but the Japanese font looks really nice and clean. It's very easy to read. And sometimes it'll change. For example, it'll get really big when the monkeys speak. So yeah, it's the weird thing, but a lot of text, especially 8-bit games, if it's Japanese, it's really hard to parse. So I was really appreciative that, okay, the text in this game is really, really beautiful in Japanese. Now, Eiji Aonuma obviously worked on the game. Then it was straight to Zelda where he stayed. And no complaints considering all he's accomplished with that series. But is there any element of later Zelda games that you think might have been inspired by Marvelous?
I think I brought it up before, but Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures definitely has Marvelous elements in it. And you can kind of tell at the time, especially of Four Swords Adventures, that Aonuma was thinking about Marvelous because in Japan there was Tetris Trackers, which was this Japanese exclusive mode where it was basically a remake of the Satellaview Marvelous games, and originally began development as a Marvelous game on the GameCube. And there's 3D models of Gina and Dion, and players would run around and speak to the pirates, or that they became pirates. I don't know who they would have been, probably counselors or just random NPCs from Marvelous. But in Tetris Trackers, it's Tetra's pirate crew. And Tetra comments over the game, and it would be Miss Gina instead commenting over the game. Very much like the Satellaview games that I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment. But the fact that it was a Marvelous game, and then it basically got retooled to be a Zelda game, presumably because they could sell Zelda better.
Right.
They could include it as part of Four Swords. I would say that game is definitely inspired quite heavily by Marvelous. I would imagine that Aonuma also got a lot of his puzzle design thinking for games from Marvelous. Because looking at his history, the only thing he'd done before this was NES Open Tournament Golf, where he did graphics. When he joined on Ocarina of Time and he was the director of all the dungeons, that meant he was now in charge of having to come up with all of the puzzles and the progression and stuff from dungeons, the items that you'd need to get through. And in a way, that is very Marv thinking about it. You go into a dungeon, you get a specific item, and then you figure out the context where you'd need that item to progress. It's got that sort of adventure game kind of feel to it. And Marvelous was probably training his brain up to come up with puzzles like that he could then use in a more action-orientated way in the Zelda series. At least the ones he was directing it, which then went on to influence all the games up till Breath of the Wild, really, when they obviously retooled how that series works.
Yeah, Four Swords Adventure come to mind. Also, Triforce Heroes is maybe even a closer analogy, because you have literally 3 different characters. And so, yeah, let's get into the Satellaview games. While Marvelous is one game, it might technically be a series because there are spin-offs for the Satellaview. What are these games, and how are they different from the main game?
So there's 2 on the Satellaview. There's BS Marvelous Time Athletic, which was the first one. And actually, technically that's the first Marvelous game, because it came out before Marvelous did. And then BS Marvelous Camp Arnold, which came out afterwards. And the 2 are, Time Athletic and Camp Arnold pretty much play the same. The only difference is the map it's on. And the game is a stamp rally. So what a stamp rally is, for those who don't know, in Japan, it's just a thing where you'd get a book and you'd go to various locations in a town or a city, usually it's train stations, and then you get a stamp from someone there. And then you have to go around, you have to collect all the stamps. And if you collect all the stamps, then you get a prize. It's usually done as entertainment for kids and for events and stuff like that. You can still do it. When I was living in Kyoto, I went and I had a book, and if there were stamps at train stations, I would get them and just slowly fill up this book full of stamps. And the idea was to turn that into a game. So in you play as Dion in both games. And in Time Athletic, you're on the ship that's on its way to Camp Arnold. And then obviously the Camp Arnold one is you're in Camp Arnold and it's a bigger map. And you just run around and you've got to find all of the stamps, pretty much. I don't think they're actually stamps. I don't remember. They might be luck rocks, to be fair. I don't remember exactly what you're picking up. But as you're doing this, you'd get commentary from Miss Gina and Mr. Arnold, who would both just talk about how the game's going and discuss various changes that are happening to the map. And that would give you hints as to where to go. And it was just a question of how fast can you beat it, hence Time Athletic. How quickly can you run around this map and find all the collectibles? Which is what Tetris Trackers then became, but with pirates instead.
Yeah, I had no idea that Tetris Trackers was secretly a Marvelous game originally. And there's even, in your video as well, there's even art, or maybe, how can I describe it? Concept art? Miss Gina became Tetra, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, there's 3D models made for Miss Gina, and then we haven't seen a full 3D model for Dion, but we do have UI and HUD icons for him, with different faces and stuff. It's exactly what would happen with Link in the end. somewhere there is a 3D model of Dion in different colors that they've got. We only have these files because they were accidentally left in the game for Tetris Trackers. This is leftover graphic data that they forgot to remove. I don't think they've ever talked about Marvelous being a Tetris Tracker game. Maybe Aonuma dropped it in a random interview somewhere, but I don't. As far as I know, at least as far as I remember, it's not been brought up.
Yeah, unfortunately, this game never came out in the States, and even in Japan, I'm not sure if it did all that well, considering it released so late in the Super Famicom's lifespan. And I've been reading some Japanese blogs about the game, and one notes that there were no commercials, and Nintendo decided to focus their marketing on titles like Donkey Kong Country 3 and new Game Boy releases, and also the N64. Why do you think it never came out in the States? Is it just bad timing or something else?
I think it is pretty much bad timing. If you look, so the game came out after the Nintendo 64 did, but in the same year in Japan as the Nintendo 64 did. And if I was working at Nintendo of America, what I would want people to be picking up this holiday would be Super Mario 64.
Right.
So I wouldn't be putting much marketing towards a new IP that's also sort of niche-ish. Obviously, RPGs and adventure games are quite big in Japan, but in the States, adventure games are like PC-based. There was very few on actual consoles, and RPGs in Europe just basically didn't exist. And you had Final Fantasy, and you technically had Earthbound, but they didn't sell. Final Fantasy did okay, but the Dragon Quest series and Earthbound in particular didn't do massively well, and they're quite big commitments when it comes to localizing them and bringing them over. So having this new IP that's not an action game, but is more of a narrative-driven puzzle game with a ton of text to localize and bring over and all this coming out after the Nintendo 64 was going to come out, it just doesn't seem like a very good commitment of time and money. When games like Kirby's Dream Land 3 and Donkey Kong Country 3, which both also came out after the 64 launched, but those are platformers with very minimal dialogue in them. And in the case of Donkey Kong Country 3, I mean, that was made in the UK, so they didn't even need to localize that one. So it was easy to release. So I think that's it. Japan kept supporting the Super Nintendo up until the year 2000, something ridiculous like that. But America and Europe cut it off very shortly after the 64 came out so they could put all their focus on that. And I think Marvelous was just a victim of its timing. If Marvelous had released in 1994, let's say, in Japan, I reckon they would have brought it over to at least America.
It has been re-released twice, once on Wii U, and just a few months ago on Nintendo Switch Online, which is how I'm playing it. And there's also a Spirit of the Three Boys in Smash Ultimate. So maybe 20 million people or so have potentially been exposed to the series. Do you think there's any chance for a possible remake in the future?
I never say never. I think it entirely comes down to whether Aonuma can step away from Zelda, because he's basically been locked to Hyrule over the last 2 decades. And even though he's not the director anymore, he is the series supervisor. And it seems no matter what he tries, he keeps ending up back at Zelda. We talked, obviously, at some point they seem to be remaking the Time Athletic and Camp Arnold, and then it became a Zelda game. And recently there was an interview where Aonuma talked about making a new IP and not doing something Zelda, and talked potentially about making a game where you star as a thief. And we haven't seen that, but I reckon that new Echoes of Wisdom that they announced, if you start looking at the way that game is sort of framed, Zelda starts off in a dungeon, there seems to be implications that maybe people's memories of her have been stolen or something. I wouldn't surprise me if we found out some point down the line in an interview that Echoes of Wisdom started off as a new IP, and then they were like, we could make it a Zelda game. And we get that. I think it really does just comes down to Aonuma being like, I want to do Marvelous again. Or at least we could get a situation like Famicom Detective Club, where an outside party who liked that game shows up and appeals. So Famicom Detective Club happened because Mages went to Nintendo, went to Sakamoto, who was the writer and director of that game, and was basically like, we want to remake this. And he was like, yeah, go ahead. Nintendo's team won't be involved at all, but I'll supervise the project. Potentially, if we get game team out there who want to remake Marvelous and go to Nintendo and go to Aonuma and be like, we really like Marvelous and think it would do well on modern platforms. Here's our demo for a potential remake. Aonuma might be keen on it, because I guarantee he holds this game in a special place in his heart. Like, it's his first child, basically. The first thing he made. And back in the day, after they made this, they expressed interest in doing a sequel. They wanted to do a follow-up, not immediately, because I think this game started development in something like 1992 or 1993. But I know they talked about... Oh, in fact, no, it's 1991, is when this game started development. So it was in development for 5 years. They talked about taking a short break, but then hopefully returning to the game. And then it just didn't happen because they all got split up, and Aonuma ended up being way too focused on Zelda to be able to do anything with it. So this is all a roundabout way to say never. Who knows what's going to happen? It's not impossible. The game's not so minor that I think there's no interest in bringing it back. I just think the right people need to come along and convince Aonuma that they can do it.
Yeah, I definitely think it has remake potential, since it is a new game for the West. So you could always market it like that. And the game is also fairly long. How Long to Beat has it at 11 to 13 hours, which is about the same length as Link's Awakening, for example. I know a lot of people want a remake of For the Frog, The Bell Tolls, but that game is 5 hours, so I'm like, Nintendo would never remake that and sell it for $60. But this game has a bit more meat on its bones. You never know, you never say never. And they could always just, turn it into a Zelda game, like Dion becomes Link, and then Max is a Goron, or something like that. You never know.
You never know. I really hope they don't do that, personally. This game would have been perfect to remake on the 3DS, in my opinion. It's a shame we don't have the dual screen format anymore, because when I was playing this for the first time, I was just thinking of the Chrono Trigger remake that they made for DS.
Yes.
And how you can just keep the graphics as they are, maybe with a couple touch-ups here and there, and just have it so that the bottom screen is the investigative part and the top screen is the playable part, and you can very easily swap between running around and investigating, and the way that inventory management can be handled way smoother by just clicking on it in the bottom screen rather than having to go through buttons. It would have been perfect for DS or 3DS. It's just a shame that didn't happen.
All right, final question. You need to right now, off the top of your head, come up with a moveset for them in Smash. Do they work like Pokemon Trainer, where you swap them out? Or are all three of them on the field at once, or what?
Oh, I think it would need to work like a combination of Pokemon Trainer and Ice Climbers, where you swap between them all. You have the three of them, they all have their own separate movesets, but maybe they all follow behind each other. I guess you could have it so that the other two stand in the background and they just warp out rather than the hat flying off and going onto each one. But if technically possible, I kind of like it all three of them are running around together, and using the down special, you just swap to the next one. And then obviously you got stuff like Dion can throw his baseballs for his default, and Max can kick the football. Easy stuff there. Side specials can be whatever one of the items. Dion has a kind of dash Pegasus boot style thing, if I remember right. So you could do stuff like that. And then obviously they got different stats. Max is faster, but he gets knocked back easier. Max is slower, but knockback is limited. And Jack has the best jump and recovery of the group, but kind of middling attack power. And then their final smashes is them doing the big group attack. Or three of them all coming together to lift a giant rock up and throw it at someone or something like that. Or get on their pirate ship and fire a cannon or something.
Here's my pitch for the final Smash. It opens up the investigation window, and then all the other opponents are trapped in the window, and you got to click on them to KO them. So there's definitely a lot of potential to put them in Smash. So with the power of the Switch 2, maybe they can be in Smash finally.
We can only hope.
So Joshua, it was great to chat with you about this hidden gem, Marvelous, Another Treasure Island. Definitely worth checking out, or just wait for the remake that will absolutely come out very, very soon. So, Joshua, where can people find you?
So, you can find me on Twitter or X under Mr. Nintendo, or go to YouTube and look up the Nintendo Chronicler and find me there. I've got a video all on Marvelous that you can find on the channel if you want a more in-depth look at everything. Go check that out. And I just released a new video about golfing games on Nintendo systems. All of the Mario golf games and all of the non-Mario golf games that they made. That took me ages to make, and it's the longest video on the channel. I hope you enjoy.
Yes, and Aonuma worked on one of them, so
yes,
there's a connection there.
There is a connection.
So yes, the links to everything will be in the podcast description, so listeners, check it out. Joshua, once again, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Today's feature is on Dragon Quest Carnival in Minato, Mirai, a Dragon Quest-themed event happening right now in Yokohama. This is the same general area as last year's Pokemon Worlds. Shockingly, I am actually on time talking about an event still happening, so if you're listening to this podcast day one, you've got about a week left to check it out, as long as you're somewhere close to Yokohama. If not, well, you're going to check it out via listening to me right now. If you're listening to this podcast, I probably don't need to explain what Dragon Quest is, but this event isn't just being randomly held. It's to hype up the releases of Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D and, to a lesser extent, 1 and 2 HD 2D. And also to promote tourism in Yokohama. There's definitely a lot of emphasis on the upcoming HD 2D titles, but it does serve as a general Dragon Quest event as well. There's a few key activities: the stamp rally, the cafe, slime painting, monster photo spots, pop-up shop, and a DQ3 exhibit. I did everything except for one, which we'll get into. I will say that the event has been slightly expanded since the last time I visited. Now places all around Yokohama will hand out a Dragon Quest sticker if you buy something there, and the Ferris wheel has a slime design on it at night. But let's focus on the stuff I actually did. Now, everything takes place within 2, or I guess technically 3 buildings: Mark IS, which is a department store, and Landmark Plaza, which, yes, is another department store. That one is connected to Landmark Tower, which is a big tower. Maybe Plaza and Tower are 2 different buildings, but let's say they are the same. Both are thankfully very close to each other. Originally, I wondered if all the events would have us hopping around all the tourist spots of Minato Mirai, which would be fun in the sense that it would feel like a real adventure, but considering the horrible heat, I am glad that everything took place inside nice air-conditioned buildings. I always considered myself pretty strong when it came to summer, and Japanese summers never fazed me, but this year's has been brutal. So I'm trying to find things I can do without melting, like a slime, if you will. I got there a few minutes before the department stores actually opened, but right at the entrance of Mark IS is a big golem statue. There were several monster statues scattered across the event area, and all of them were pretty large and highly detailed. Golem is a good one to start off with, since it'll immediately grab your attention. The department stores opened up at 10, and our reservation for the DQ Cafe was at 11 a.m., so we had about an hour to participate in the stamp rally. Inside Mark IS, you get a slimed-shaped stamped card, and you can go around places inside the department stores to get a stamp. The card tells you where they are, so they aren't super hidden, but sometimes it can be a bit vague. Scattered across Mark IS are other monster statues. There's the iconic slime, which is probably way larger than it is in the game, and also a great saber cat was right outside the entrance. King Slime is displayed triumphantly in the middle of the area with a background wall and 8-bit pixel maps on the floor. On the back of the wall is a big DQ3 HD 2D mural, something that I will mention many more times before the segment is over. Now, above the King Slime statue are 3 giant balloons of blue, orange, and green slimes. It's just a fantastic photo op all around. I mean, when are you going to see giant slime balloons? Well, actually, there is one more giant slime balloon I'll talk about, but still. So my wife and I got our stamp rally cards right next to the big King Slime statue, and off we went. The stamp areas are really just kiosks with the stamp and some flyers advertising Dragon Quest games and the Dragon Quest Carnival. Every stamp kiosk, though, featured special art for the event, relating to tourism in Yokohama. You've got the slimes riding the cable cars, which are in the Minato Mirai area, golems at the red brick warehouse section, dragons in Chinatown. Ironically, at these tourist locations, there aren't any DQ things there to my knowledge, but I guess the idea is that you start here, and then you're inspired to check out the rest. The stamp lines weren't very long, except for the last one, but even then, you're waiting maybe 5 minutes. And of course, the stamps are the mini medals from the game. You only need 6 stamps, so thankfully it wasn't some all-day ordeal. On our way to the second stamp, we passed by Granif, which is a Japanese t-shirt and apparel store. And yes, right now they are showcasing their 5th collaboration with Dragon Quest. This is technically separate from the carnival, but nice timing either way. I picked up some Slime Night socks, which look really awesome, and the embroidery is excellent. Definitely check out Granite's website to see their Dragon Quest stuff if you haven't seen it yet. We got 3 stamps in Mark IS, and then it was off to Landmark Plaza for the other 3. This area is where most of the fun happens, so it's good to start with Mark IS and then do the rest in Landmark, which is much larger and has a more spacious first floor. But same deal, you go to these spots and stamp your slime card. When I got all the stamps, you take it to the counter to get a special slime stamp and a sticker featuring all the unique Yokohama themed art. Listen, it's about the journey, not the sticker. Also in the middle of Landmark Plaza is the Dragon Quest pop-up shop. When I went there, they were giving out timed tickets, and I got one for about noon, which was perfect since my reservation for the cafe was at 11. When I entered the pop-up shop around noon, they were handing out timed tickets for 4:30, so rule of thumb for Japan in general, get those timed tickets ASAP. It's never going to be too early. So, stamp rally done. Pretty straightforward, you go from A to B. Oh, I saw another golem statue and one of Draki with Draki stickers on the wall. Landmark Plaza also has some, I guess, hidden Dragon Quest monsters plastered on the walls. There was yet a third golem, but this time it was just a black outline on some bricks, which is pretty clever. I also saw an imp next to a restaurant because he's got a fork, so that fits. These aren't labeled anywhere, so you kind of have to just stumble across them, but they are fun photo ops. But one of the biggest events at the carnival is the Dragon Quest Cafe, courtesy of Fanbase. I think Cafe Fanbase is really just a place where pop-up shops rent out their space. It is distinctly nondescript. It's a big rectangular room with a basic appearance because they deck it out with whatever collab they're hosting. We had reservations, so we got in and were seated quickly, and then we had the monumental task of figuring out what on earth we were going to eat. There were 4 main entrees: golden slime chicken plate, slime butter chicken curry, a mimic burger, and a metal slime cake, which isn't a meal, but it was in the entree section. Now, the epic struggle is deciding on what sounds most appealing and what looks the coolest. I mean, the butter chicken curry is up my alley, but it was just a slime shape in rice. The metal slime cake looked awesome. It looked like a real bubbly metal slime, but my wife and I couldn't resist the allure of the mimic burger. The mimic monster, if you don't know, is the classic RPG mimic. It's a treasure chest with fangs and a huge tongue. Now, how is this a burger? I'll say barely. It is meat between bread, but the bread is shaped like a treasure chest. It looks amazing, trying to find a picture of it on my socials, but it was admittedly very cumbersome to actually eat. First of all, it was huge. It felt like half a loaf of bread. It's probably not bigger than a normal half-foot sub, lengthwise, but the width was pretty absurd. It's hard to pick up and eat as a burger, so you're going to need to break out that knife and fork. The burger part was also kind of a potato salad mixed with cold hamburger meat. It tasted pretty good, but I do wish it was, hot. A hot hamburger instead of a cold dish. It also came with some chips and salsa because why not? I don't regret ordering it at all despite the other dishes looking easier to actually eat, because it is a really fun eating experience just trying to figure it out. Now, we weren't content with just our mimic burgers, we also ordered some slime dango. This was sakura dango with the pink, white, and green mochi, but the slime faces are on them. This tasted pretty good. I mean, it's hard to mess up dango. For my fun drink, I got a king slime ice cream soda, where a big scoop of blue ice cream serves as the king slime, and my wife just got some blue soda in a slime glass. Again, you're ordering it to take pictures and partake in the experience. It was an expensive but fun meal. Nothing tasted horrible, and I can tell everyone I ate a treasure chest. As for the decorations inside the cafe, there were a lot of slime scattered about, and every table had a slime plushie you could take pictures with. The ceiling also had medals with monsters hanging from them. The back wall had 2 huge banners of Dragon Quest III HD 2D and Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D with videos of general Dragon Quest gameplay. And oh yeah, it goes without saying that DQ music was blasting through the speakers. Again, these huge art banners were pretty awesome. It was great to see the stellar artwork blown up so big. Now, inside the cafe is the slime painting. This activity is the exact same one as on Dragon Quest Island on Awaji Island, where you paint a big slime and take it home. I didn't do this. Why? Well, I asked my wife to reserve the cafe and the slime painting. I think I was a little confused about where the activities were, so I asked her to check it out. And she reserved both at the same time because she told me that the slime painting was inside the cafe, so you need to select the same time for both. Now, while both are in the same place, you do need to reserve for different times, so unfortunately we had to choose one over the other, and we chose the cafe. I did see inside the slime painting area, and it seemed fun, so next time I'll check it out. After the cafe, we took a picture of the big display in the middle with a big Dragon Quest Carnival art on the first floor and the giant slime balloon hovering above it. To get a good shot, you actually need to go to the third floor since both are so huge. The pics look great though. The slime kind of does look like CGI somehow. I think it's the lighting and the simple design, but I assure you it is real. This was in the exact same spot as last year's giant Pokemon card and Pikachu balloon, so they've really got their big art and giant balloon game down here at Landmark Plaza. After that, we went to the aforementioned pop-up shop. Now, you can buy DQ merch at a lot of places, so I wanted something that you could only get here, specifically themed after the carnival. And they didn't have much. They had some shirts with the Dragon Quest Carnival logo on it, but they were, quote, free size, meaning one size fits all. I checked the measurements and maybe it would fit me, but the shirts were too expensive for maybe. I did nab a plastic bottle with the Yokohama art on it though. Now, is 2,200 yen a fair price for a clear bottle, something that I could probably buy for 100 yen at Can-Do? The answer is no, but I am sure I will need this bottle one day. I did see my wife using it, so it has some practical use. I'm sure it'll save my life down the line one day. But if you were just looking for DQ merch, the shop is pretty comprehensive. They even have a lot of books and CDs. And in a display case inside the shop, they had the Switch and PS5 boxes of Dragon Quest III HD 2D and the little plastic standees of all the classes, so I got to see those up close, which was pretty cool. The last thing on my list was the Dragon Quest III HD 2D exhibit inside Landmark Tower. So after a few minutes of figuring out how to actually get inside the tower, we made our way up there. You do need a ticket to go to the observation area where the exhibit is, but they did sell a special Dragon Quest ticket, which gives you some postcards. I bought that ticket and got 4 nice postcards I will never use, but I will hoard until the day I die. Up on the observation deck, you can see all around the Minato Mirai area, which is a great view. You can see the ocean, you can see the huge buildings, but forget about a gorgeous view of the harbor on a clear day. I was here to see some Dragon Quest stuff. There's another statue here of the slime stack, and next to it, a huge poster with a message from Yuji Horii talking about the exhibit. Now, the exhibit is not just more Dragon Quest statues or photo ops or whatever, although those are here, but it displayed art and design documents from Dragon Quest III. So this was the most historically enriching part of the carnival. Unfortunately, you can't take pictures of any of the art or documents. I guess they don't want you to steal their secrets. But it was amazing to see in person. Some looked like copies, but others looked like they were the original copy. They even had the holes from ring binders in them. The documents included rough sketches of the classes, dialogue scenes, maps, the original score sheets, and so on. It was really incredible to see in person, and we often forget how analog game development was in the 80s. It was mostly on those square graph papers, which makes me think of Mario, since that's how they drew their levels back in the day. Man, let's give it up for graph paper. It was carrying Japanese game development for a long time. Fortunately, you can take a picture of a big poster signed by Horii, Sugiyama, and Toriyama, which really stings now that he's passed. Pretty much anything he's touched becomes a small piece of history. After the exhibit area, you do walk through yet another merch shop selling a lot of the same stuff as the DQ pop-up shop, so here's your second chance. There's also a library area, and there was also a section called Dragon Quest Library, which highlighted Dragon Quest-themed books. These aren't just art books or manuals, but in Japan there's a lot of themed children's workbooks. For example, a kanji drill book, but themed around Dragon Quest. There are picture books for kids, math practice books. You'd be surprised about how many different types of Dragon Quest books exist. The library also had a rather absurd number of slime plushies all around. This area also had larger pieces of the art featuring the Yokohama art, which I mentioned earlier. Turn the corner and you're at the other part of the observation area, but now there are silhouettes of monsters on the glass which make for nice photo ops. All of Yokohama is now encased inside a slime. There's also a big statue of Slime Dye, which is one of my favorite monsters, and yes, another gigantic mural featuring the Dragon Quest III HD 2D art. I mean, it looks great, so I don't blame them for slapping it everywhere. So that was Dragon Quest Carnival, just a fun way to spend a couple of hours in Yokohama, which in itself is a fantastic day trip from Tokyo, and something you can't see all in one day. I will say that the cafe reservation is a must. That was such a big part of the experience. If you're listening to this now and are thinking about going, well, I'm sure the cafe and slime painting reservations are all filled up. So is it worth it to go without doing either of them? I'd say yes, but have some other non-DQ travel spots in mind when you head over there to fill out the day. But anyways, it was just a great celebration of Dragon Quest with some fun activities, absolutely amazing photo ops, and the exhibit looking at all the DQ3 documents was awe-inspiring. My wife said that was her favorite part, and she's never wrong. And yes, I did knock out one more Pokeled while I was in Yokohama, so my Pokeled collection has now grown to 9. Just 300 more to go. That's it for the feature, and now for some news. Marketing for The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is ramping up, and we got a brand new trailer highlighting parts of the world and brand new game mechanics that really blew this whole thing open. It looks far closer to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom than I originally expected. The whole ecosystem is very similar to the tools you use in Tears, but now we have the bind ability, which looks very ultra handy, but you can't move things when you're stationary. Instead, things move with you. So it has the green light that connects you and the object, but you can't bring the object closer to you or push it away. But the limitations are interesting since you can make puzzles based around positioning yourself correctly. They showed off a lot of fun things you can do, like move a giant boulder or pick up an enemy and then drop them off a cliff. Maybe the most mind-blowing thing for me was connecting yourself to a spider, and then the spider crawls up the wall, carrying you with it. They also showed off reverse bond, which kind of works like the time reversal in Tears of the Kingdom, where you move with another object's momentum. In past 2D Zelda games, you never really thought about interacting with the world. A wall was a wall. It was there to block you. But now it really feels like the newer 3D Zelda titles in that you can interact with literally anything. They've shown it off a few times, but even walking on top of trees feels like a boundary-breaking bit. I mean, you shouldn't be able to do that, right? It's crazy to see those trees, which are a 3D version of Link's Awakening art style, but you can walk on them. I never imagined as a kid I'd be walking on trees in a top-down Zelda game. Technology has really come a long way. Another element making its debut in 2D Zelda is a horse. Zelda can summon and ride a horse all over Hyrule. I do wonder how they're going to balance it, since, as we saw in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, once you get all these crazy mobility options, a horse seems rather quaint. I mean, I could ride a spider up a wall. Do I really need a horse? But hopefully there are some fun horse-specific segments like races or obstacle courses that take advantage of your steed. Also, it seems like you can have different types of horses, as 2 were shown off in the trailer, a brown one and a white one. How about a green horse? Let's really mix it up. Other stuff, Zelda does have equipment, or at least a singular item slot that also changes her outfit. We saw a headband that gives her more hearts and changes her outfit to Ponytail Zelda. They also teased a Gerudo outfit. The trailer shows her shopping for other items, including Zora flippers, so I imagine she will have outfits themed after all the races. And yes, the races of Hyrule do return, as we see the Gerudo, Zora, Goron, and the Deku, which make their long-awaited return. I checked to see what was the last game that they were actually in, and they do briefly appear in Triforce Heroes, so they haven't been gone that long, but it's good to see them back and treated on the same tier as the other races. Their designs look great as well. They have all these different hairstyles made of leaves, and one looks very close to a Korok leaf, so that's a fun connection. We also got confirmation that the game divides the Zora into the river and sea tribes, so no time travel or alternate dimensions here. I actually did forget that they did this trick in the Oracle of Ages game, but I do like these deliberate callbacks to the Game Boy Zelda games, because I am really hoping this is a spiritual successor to those, instead of just a Link to the Past sequel like A Link Between Worlds was. The Gorons look pretty much the same as do the Gerudo, but again, there's novelty in seeing Gerudo in a 2D Zelda game. Yes, I know they were in Four Swords Adventure, but come on. I'm also interested to see how they interact with Zelda specifically, since a big part of the Gerudo storylines in past Zelda titles are the conflict between Link being a dude in an all-women's society. All these races inhabit areas that are new to the Link to the Past map. A lot of deliberate callbacks to the Switch Zelda titles too, since they share the locations like Elden Volcano and the Faron Wetlands. The Zora region is called Jabul Waters, which is a nice reference to good old Jabu Jabu. I don't want to go all timeliney here, but I do wonder if this is maybe the last game on the Downfall timeline before Breath of the Wild, since there are stronger links. That wasn't a pun, I swear. But Echoes of Wisdom, it's easily my most anticipated game. You've got a lot of inspiration from Link's Awakening, my favorite 2D Zelda, and the mechanics of the Switch Zeldas, which are my favorite 3D Zelda titles, so could this be the ultimate game? I mean, probably. Other Nintendo stuff, the new quarterly reports came in. Switch is at 143.42 million sold, so yes, I do think it will eventually pass the PS2 and DS, which sit around 150 million. Imagine in the Wii U days saying, yeah, but the next console will be the highest selling ever. For software, Thousand Year Door hit 1.76 million, which is technically the fastest selling Paper Mario title, and Luigi's Mansion 2 sold over 1 million its opening weekend, so yeah, that's why they made that game. An interesting thing to note is that Breath of the Wild shockingly outsold Tears of the Kingdom this past quarter to 100k versus 190k. There's been a lot of discussion about Tears' lack of legs after its explosive opening quarter. I think it really boils down to newcomers to the franchise still wanting to play Breath of the Wild first, since Tears is a direct sequel. I wonder if Nintendo will hesitate in the future about making such linear sequels when it comes to Zelda. But then again, if it tops out at 20 million sold, I don't think Nintendo will be sad about that. I've said this before, but there are some franchises where the breakthrough game has never been topped. No Mario platformer has outsold Super Mario Bros. On NES. No Pokemon game has outsold Red and Blue. Breath of the Wild just may be that game for the Zelda franchise, something that will never be topped until the next huge breakthrough. These numbers do have people worried regarding whether or not Switch can meet their originally announced goal of 13.5 million units this fiscal year. There is a strong holiday lineup, but I don't think that's enough to push it over the goal line. Price drop? Not impossible, but I think holiday bundles, like say a Switch with Mario Kart 8 and Odyssey together for $400, would probably be more likely. Next quarter we'll have sales data on Nintendo World Championships, EMEO, and the opening week of Zelda, so let's see if the Switch numbers boost up a bit. Last bit of news, here's what's happening in Tokyo. There's still a lot of new collaborations coming to the city, including Power Pros teaming up with Tokyo Ramen Street in Tokyo Station. You can get a special Power Pro sticker if you eat at any shop, and there's some exclusive merch as well. Sunshine City in Ikebukuro also has an exhibit for the Digimon anime to celebrate its 25th anniversary. I never did get into Digimon despite having the actual virtual pet. I mean, it's hard to compete with Pokemon, let's be real. I can only remember so many names. There's also an Apex Legends themed cafe called Nessie Cafe in Ikebukuro. Not too often you see collabs for Western games, but Apex Legends is one that has really broken the barrier, and is still pretty popular over here. As for ongoing big events, the Dragon Quest Carnival is still happening in Yokohama, as is the Secret of Mother 2 exhibit, which will be next week's feature, so look forward to it. Alright, let's get out of here. Thanks as always for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app. Leave a 5-star review as well, it really helps with visibility. The podcast is also available on YouTube, so like and subscribe there as well. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram. Just search for Tokyo Game Life or find the links in the podcast description. If you like the podcast, be sure to share with your friends and on social media. If there's anything you want me to talk about or cover, just message me on Twitter. The next episode will be on August 25th. See you next time. Matane!